All right. Hello, everybody. So tonight, what we are going to do is because we're kind of pushing up on a deadline here with the holiday, I'm actually going to do a quick little mini lesson tonight. I try to keep it to about 20 minutes, and that's what the homework will be. So I want to start with the discussion. The next slide in the pack is the first party system. And again, this is just one of those slides I put up periodically to help you understand what we're talking about in terms of party. So you've got before the founding of the Republic, that's when we've got the Federalists and Anti-Federalists. No party during George Washington. Then you have the Federalist, and the only Federalist president is John Adams. Some people lump, I actually do myself, put him in with the Federalist Party more often than not, partly because he is responsible for establishing a lot of what we use as a big, federal government, the role of the federal government. And then you're going to have a series of the three Democratic Republican presidents before we move into a new era. So this is going to take us up through the election of 24. And tomorrow we'll be doing two very important pieces, the Monroe Doctrine and the Missouri Compromise, two critical things for this era. So as we move forward here, I'm going to just kind of show you where we are here. We're going to talk first about James Monroe. Now, what's interesting about James Monroe is he is going to come to the presidency in 1816. And while 1860 may seem like a long time after the War of 1812, it's actually not. If you think about the War of 1812 ends in 1850, officially comes to a conclusion with a treaty signed about the time everybody hears about it. So when he comes in, he's going to be elected in November, take over in March of 1816. He is in some ways a continuation of the old, but also sort of we're turning a corner a little bit. He is elected in the first election in 1816, almost unanimously by the Electoral College. What's very interesting in the story about Monroe that I like people to remember is Monroe was popular enough that he could have actually won unanimous vote in the Electoral College. But one person throws away their vote, so he doesn't get it. Thereby, there is only one person in American history that actually has the honor of having received a unanimous vote in the Electoral College, and that's George Washington. Monroe didn't want to interfere with that sort of role and that honor he had. He is a Virginian, so he's the last of what we call the Virginia dynasty. He's also the last of the Revolutionary era presidents. Jackson will be around in the Revolution, but he's just a kid. James Monroe actually fights in the Revolution. He's somebody of the age where he can fight. But the Republican Party is going to come into this new post-war world with this renewed sense of national spirit. If you look at some of the things here, these are things that are all going to take place during his administration. The Monroe Doctrine, the First Seminole War, Lafayette's going to come from the United States. We're going to purchase Florida and that is territory, as well as the Missouri Compromise. So there are some really big deals. And if you look here, my mistake, it was 1820. I was thinking it was 1816, 1820, where he gets almost all but one. So when you look at it, there's almost like there's no challenge. There's nobody who's really a challenge to his power or his consolidation of authority. So James Monroe gets this label that we give the era in which he ruled as the era of good feelings, in the sense that everybody gets along. There's no partisan politics. We don't have a lot of issues between the Federalists are kind of there, but they're dying out. What you have, however, is one party, but you have a lot of tensions that are going to start, sort of under the surface around. And so one of the things that you will see that becomes more and more obvious is that some of the deeper issues that will take us up to the Civil War are going to become really, I think, firmly clearly identified during this time. So when we look ahead here, just going back again to the War of 1812 for one more minute, is the idea that I think in one of the classes I talked about being the second war for independence. In some ways, this really represents, the beginning of us as a nation, as an independent, autonomous nation. Up until this point in time, most countries sort of saw the United States as an extension of Britain. And with that, there's just a level of respect about whether or not, we really deserved it, whether or not what we did in this war is that we proved once and for all, we were a legitimate power. We were a nation to be, reckoned with. Internationally, we're going to move to a period where, because of our geopolitical balance, and by geopolitics, I'm thinking the politics of geography, with that ocean between Europe over here and the United States over here, that ocean is going to give us an incredible advantage where nations like France or Germany or those countries have no choice but constantly being in each other's business. We're 3,000 miles away. And that's a significant cushion to keep us away from some of the conflicts that they're going to be dealing with. Now, the next point, number 3, goes back to something I mentioned in class the other day. And if you recall, I can go back to it now. I see if I can figure out which number it was. It was all the way back to the Embargo Act. And if you go all the way back to the Embargo Act, here we go. The Embargo Act right here, it's a disaster for American commerce. It says there was an unexpected long-term benefit to be discussed later. Well, it's later. So what I want to do now is talk about what that means in terms of that long-term benefit. The long-term benefit I'm talking about is when the United States was unable to take part in commercial trade because of the Embargo Act. We're not allowed to buy stuff, in terms of the imported goods. We're not allowed to sell stuff in terms of exported goods. People just, their entire economies, personal economies, really was in a shambles. So people still have kids. They still have families to feed. They have to figure out what to do. So there's a phrase that we use a lot of times, in life called necessity is the mother of invention. If your kids are hungry, you're not going to let them go hungry, right? You're going to figure out how to feed them. Well, what happens is that Embargo Act, as terrible as it was, actually, in the long-term sense, is a good thing, because what it does is it forces us, rather than just relying on being a commercial empire, it forces us to look at doing things a little differently. And so what it ends up doing is it forces us to develop other kinds of industries, perhaps the manufacturing industry. We have a war. We can't buy things from outside. We can't get things from outside. So sort of people with a lot of ingenuity are going to go out and say, you know what? I don't need to buy those shoes from England. I'm going to make them. I don't need to get that from there. So-and-so. I'm going to make it. It forced us to rely on ourselves. It forced us to develop our own internal industries. And this is really a beginning of the manufacturing revolution, the early manufacturing revolution in the United States. So in some ways, Jefferson, Mr. Agrarian, actually did a lot to move forward the Industrial Revolution in the United States by virtue, sort of indirectly, by virtue of the embargo acts that he placed. I'm sure he wouldn't have been thrilled about that. But again, that's going to be really important in terms of making us sort of have a long-term sustainable economy. The other thing that this does is, now that the war is over, what we'll find is that the British really do pull up stakes. At this point, I think they had been under the impression, really since the war, the American Revolution, that it was only a matter of time and they would be able to retake the United States, what was the area of the United States, the Americas. The War of 1812 kind of puts that to rest. We're not coming back. We're not going to be part of the British Empire anymore. So they pull up stakes. They leave the forts, and in leaving the forts, they also leave the Native Americans a supply network of weapons and supplies that they had been using to sort of sustain their resistance against the colonial or against the Americans. So what happens is, now we have an increase in immigration from other countries, but also migration out west. And in large part, this was considered the victory over the native peoples. We sort of start emerging with this desire to, really conquer the continent. There's a great quote here from Washington. It says, "The great rule of conduct for us in regard to foreign nations is that we should have as little political correction as possible. It is our true policy, steer clear of permanent alliances already with the foreign world." So again, that's that isolationism. Here's a picture that goes to showing the emerging industrial economy. And then you've got the wagon trains that will emerge during this period. Now, to do all of this, Henry Clay, who we've mentioned before, is a Kentucky congressman, is the gentleman who comes up with what will be one of the most far-reaching economic programs and plans if you will, for how we're going to become a completely self-sufficient nation, not dependent on Europe for these goods and these other items that we, seem to be so dependent on. It's going to create regional interdependence. That is, where every region does something, but it's sort of like this balance where we all kind of help each other out. In the goal ultimately is that the northern factory workers provide both a market for agricultural goods that come from the South and the West. The South and the West are going to be the farmers and the workers who are going to buy the manufactured products produced in the North. That is, once we get our economy up and going as an industrial economy in the North. So to make this work, and don't worry if you don't understand this, we can talk about more of it tomorrow in class, but I want to introduce the idea here, is this idea that the South is going to help out the North, and the North is going to help out the South. And there's going to be this interdependent relationship between the two. Now, to make all this work, the American system is a plan that will go about how we sort of put this whole plan into effect. First thing that he recognizes we need to do is we have got to develop better transportation system between states. So we cannot rely on the kinds of roads that we have now because we simply can't do commerce. We can't trade products. We can't do any of that. So we've got to build roads. Second thing was, let's establish a protective tariff. And we'll talk about these separately, but a protective tariff. So you've got a tariff, but we're going to have a higher tariff than normal, than we've talked about thus far, with the idea that it's going to stop competition on American goods. And that way, if the only place you can buy cheap products is from American manufacturers, you're going to buy American manufactured goods, which in turn means they're going to have more money to buy your products. And then you've almost got this internal sort of, again, interdependence in the structure built. We've got a national bank, which is going to be a solid financial institution from which we can take loans. The national road, again, a major east-west road that we're going to develop. It's going to run from Maryland all the way out through the Northwest Territories in Illinois. And the Erie Canal, which is a new kind of system that we've developed, kind of like an internal man-made river that we're going to use to connect the Great Lakes all the way to the Atlantic Ocean. Again, this is a huge undertaking, and some parts of it are more complicated and more practical than others. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And the first part I want to mention, I don't know why there's like a random D here. I guess we'll get rid of that random D. I'm not sure it's on yours, but it's called the Ear of Good Fillings, is the effect of a protective tariff. So in this example here, it shows that you've got cloth made for $6 a roll. Okay, in Britain, British make the cloth for $5 a roll. Well, when they ship it to America, plus at a 25% tariff, that's $1.25 per roll, making the British roll $6.25, American products $6. If you're buying cloth and fabric, which you're going to buy? Ideally, the idea of a protective tariff is you've raised up the price of the foreign competition to a point where the American product makes financial sense. We were concerned that Britain was going to, and they had been actually, dumping products on the American market. Like they couldn't sell certain things in some of their trade with other countries. So they, to get rid of them, would just dump this fabric and dump this stuff really cheap. And then it basically ruined people because they didn't have enough money to buy both our products and the European products. It's going to protect both the Mid-Atlantic and New England industry. It's going to get support from the South and the West because it's going to make us more independent of Europe and less likely to get pulled into European conflicts. And then we've got sort of an increase of 20 to 25%. So you're going to see the tariff go up a little bit here. This is just a map, and we'll talk more about tariff policy tomorrow. If you don't understand it, please ask questions because I don't know if you have questions, and so we can talk more about it tomorrow. Now, the last couple of things I want to talk about, one is the national bank, because again, a bank is really important for businesses in creating a good economy, especially in a manufacturing economy, because you've got to be able to have a place where you can borrow money. Well, if you recall, the bank, when it was first started, the First National Bank only had a 20-year charter. Well, that goes 96 to 06 to 16. The charter expires in 1916 or 1816. Well, we've got to decide if we're going to have the bank again. So they agreed that it had worked well the first 20 years. They gave it another 20-year charter. So the Second National Bank kicks in, stabilizing the currency. We've got a unified monetary system. So all the country, everyone in the United States is using the same currency. Again, like I said, that 20-year charter. We know that part of the board of the stock is controlled by the federal government. The rest of it's private. So you've got a private-public partnership here a little bit. And Madison, who had actually opposed the first, doesn't oppose this one because it was working. And for Madison to upset that and pull that national bank out and not use that as an option again, he believed would cause more damage than any trouble it potentially caused. So although he is a Republican and a strict constructionist, you're going to see that at this point, the benefits for him have outweighed the negatives. In terms of internal improvements, and I think a key word for you to know here at this point is the word, I'm going to see if I can type it here. Type it. Infrastructure. The infrastructure. That's a term you should know. Infrastructure is everything from roads to bridges to, in this case, canals. And these canals are going to be really essential because this is a cheap way and an easy way for us to ship goods from one place to another. And if you look here at the chart, you've got going from Troy, New York, all the way across this flat Mohawk Valley through Rochester and the Finger Lakes, all the way to Buffalo. Now, the Great Lakes, you can travel by canal and by small little stream. You can ship goods all the way through the Great Lakes. So everywhere you can bring goods all the way from Chicago area out in Illinois, all the way to Lake Erie, and then to Buffalo, to the Erie Canal, ship it to Troy. And then if you'll notice what comes from Troy, there is the Hudson River. Then you ship it down the Hudson River straight out to the new ports in New York. So the Erie Canal, constructed between 17 and 25, is the first major transportation system that we're going to develop as part of our infrastructure. And the reason why we need it, if you look here at the bottom grid, this is, if you looked across it, this is the level. This is what it is from sea level. So we had to create a waterway where we could do that canal. And we'll talk more about how that canal works tomorrow. We're working on 60 minutes. I'm going to just finish up one last thing here. I think I have one more to do. A couple more. We'll do a couple more here, and then we'll start with foreign policy. So we've got the National Road. So the National Road, if you'll notice again, it's just real easy here. There it is. You see there in Cumberland, Maryland right there, and it connects to Wheeling, West Virginia. Most of the roads up to this point in time were full of potholes. There's a picture here on the top right that shows this wagon can't even get over to where the train is because the roads are so bad. So what we started doing is creating what we call these toll roads, which were basically private companies got paid to build roads, and then they could charge a toll on those roads. That was the first toll roads and how it worked. So this was to try to give us more year-round travel on the roads, because if you look, it's all done through crushed rock. A lot of times on the West Coast, they use oyster shells, or excuse me, on the East Coast, they use oyster shells as part of that. So the National Road is really important at allowing us to get products to and from the market. And this one here shows the new states that are joining. The color is the population density per state. If you look between 92 and 1812, actually 1819, look how many states joined. Kentucky, Tennessee, Ohio, Illinois, or Louisiana, Indiana, Mississippi, Illinois, and Alabama. So by the time we get to 1819, we've had 8 new states join the Union. I think somebody asked me today how many states there were in the War of 1812. I think I may have given you the wrong number, because it looks here, by the time we're done, there have been 4 states added. I think I said there was only 3. But I forgot about Louisiana coming in 1812. So basically, we're continuing to grow. You can see the density sort of filling up these regions out here in that area of the sort of the Pittsburgh and Western PA. This here is just how the system is supposed to work, just to give you an overview of how the American system works. Again, you propose a protective tariff, transportation that includes better roads, canals, good transportation. It's going to lead to industrial growth. Goods can transport more cheaply, raw materials more cheaply. It'll open up more areas, and suddenly manufactured goods that can get back and be sold out to the other places. So I'm going to stop here. I think we did a good hit on where we need to be for tomorrow. This is your homework for tonight. Take notes on this. Please write down any questions. So we'll start tomorrow in class answering a few questions. And then that will be our, where we pick up tomorrow with National Spirit Impacts Foreign Policy. Okay? Have a good evening. Bye.